Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon at Oshkosh Media. I'm Karen Schneider, publisher of the Oshkosh Herald, and I appreciate candidate for District 54, Lori Palmeri, joining us here this afternoon. Thank you for taking time out of your day to come and meet with us.
Yes.
I appreciate it. So to kick this off, Lori, do you want to be called Ms. Palmeri or Lori?
Lori's fine.
Okay. Can you spend a few moments telling us about yourself and your background?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I do appreciate this opportunity, and I look forward to this because while we're spending a lot of time at the doors, certainly there are a lot of folks we aren't going to be able to squeeze in there. But so my name's Lori Palmeri, and I am a resident of Oshkosh since 2008, married to Tony Palmieri. I have 2 adult children and 2 grandchildren also here. And I've been serving on the City Council for 6 years now. I'm in the 2nd term as mayor. And I have really looked forward to all of the calls and all of the emails that serve the city of Oshkosh. And I also have my bachelor's from UW Oshkosh in urban and regional studies, and then master's in urban planning. And have certainly over the last 6 years had an opportunity to explore almost every inch of Oshkosh. I'm sure there are still places that I haven't seen, but it's been fantastic.
Awesome. So can you tell us why you're running as a candidate for the 54th District?
Absolutely. So I am running, as most folks are aware, our representative of 16 years, Gordon Hintz, is not running again for re-election. And I believe that my experience and my reputation as a reliable, a responsible, and a results-focused public official has, let folks know that I care about their lives and as regards to local policy. And during that 6 years of service, I had the opportunity to also work on some state issues through Gordon's office, some things that overlap, whether it be folks trying to get their unemployment during COVID, or COVID and masking issues, certainly PFAS, and got a little taste for that. But it wasn't on my radar, I will say. But we need representation who will show up and do the work.
Thank you. So I have several questions for you that have been submitted by members of the Oshkosh Herald team as well as the community.
Yes.
The same questions are being asked of each candidate, and neither of you have seen these or received the questions prior. Okay? So the first one is, if elected, can you lay out what your priorities for the office will be?
Absolutely. So the priorities that I have are in relation to again, the experience of 6 years talking with folks, and more recently, I'm looking to be the voice of Oshkosh for the faces of Oshkosh. And the faces of Oshkosh stands for fair wages and taxes, accessible, affordable housing, a clean environment, and expanded healthcare access, and strong public schools.
What qualifications do you bring to state issues that will impact Oshkosh?
Well, I would say a combination of education, experience at the local level, along with some hard knock life experiences. Certainly, I'm no stranger to struggle, and I live in the central city. I'm surrounded by over a third of our population that have a number of issues, whether it be, again, affordable housing, living wage issues, and the experience of serving on boards and commissions and different entities here in the Fox Cities, and also the experience of response to folks in need.
Okay, thank you. Focusing on the Department of Human Services, which you kind of just touched on with people in need, what opportunities do you see for improvements to our healthcare system?
So Department of Human Services are, health services or human services?
Well, the question is, how do you see improvements for our healthcare system?
Our healthcare system. It was really exciting this week. Yesterday, there was an announcement made that we'll be building, not we, but a new hospital is coming to downtown Oshkosh. Access to affordable health care is absolutely imperative for our folks to show up and do their work, and our students to show up and be ready for school. And the healthcare system has been broken for some time. We need to have an expansion, for example, with the Medicaid program. There are thousands of people who are not in that program that could be. And we need to also expand upon caregiver support and our mental health resources, mental health parity. I remember first moving to Wisconsin over 25 years ago, and the discussion of mental health parity, having our mental health and our physical health separated out is not working for us. We need to definitely have an expansion of those mental health resources along with substance and alcohol supports.
Excuse me, which brings us to our next question. How do you see the state addressing the increase in mental health issues and needs for services and providers?
The needs for services and providers are great, and the resources are few. I think that, again, it's how we address the whole person, and our state we've made some inroads. There's one example that I'd like to use, and that is with regard to peer respite. So there was a program that DHS, and I believe NAMI was a partner in, that created 2 respite homes throughout the state, and they've seen, a reduction in emergency admissions for crisis mental health. I believe that that's one thing that could be introduced into the budget to expand that based on the successes that they've had. That reduces the cost for admission. It reduces folks having inpatient needs. It's just one example of what we've done well, but we need to broaden that and open that up further.
So for us to learn from the actions or inactions in policy over the last few years, in a pandemic review, what do you believe are takeaways or lessons we can learn going forward? Excuse me.
One of the challenges that we had was the multiple sources or lack of information from multiple sources. And, at the municipal level, difficult decisions had to be made because there was maybe misinformation or disinformation coming from various sources. But we did the best we could by following science and the guidelines that we had available. I believe that our legislature has to come together, and we have to speak with and listen to one another and do that work and show up and do that work. And that means trying to provide, a balance for the rest of the community. And I'm sorry, I missed the first part of that. If I could hear that piece of it again.
Sure. To learn from our actions and inactions in policy over the last few years in a pandemic review, what do you believe are takeaways or lessons we can learn from going forward?
Right. That pandemic review, that Monday morning quarterbacking, right? If we only known then what we know now. Mm-hmm. I think that, again, we probably, we can value the different services. There was a time where, folks were confused about, what was essential and what was not essential. And certainly I think that timing is a big piece of that. Solid information and caring about one another and listening to those needs.
So Wisconsin is not alone in realizing that we have a skilled workforce shortage. What are your priorities to prepare children in our educational system to gain necessary skills needed to succeed in today's workforce?
Well, the first thing is, again, strong schools isn't just about K through 12, but certainly with our trade schools, our higher ed, and the K through 12, our students shouldn't have to have their education level determined by their zip code. There needs to be solid funding for the students and for the staff in order to create that environment or to provide that environment for students to learn. And certainly they need to see hope and they need to see examples of people showing up and doing the work, because it's been a rather fraught time over the last couple of years, whether it's virtual learning or health conditions at schools. And again, going back to mental health resources, making sure that we have a strong school that also has those mental health resources.
So another aspect of education, of course, is the teachers in those schools, right? So what types of programs can the state create or that you would support to help fill vacancies of teachers in the schools?
I had the opportunity of serving during an emergency period of 3 years for substitute teaching in the Oshkosh Area School District. And, we shouldn't have to be at a point where it's an emergency certification level, right? We need to make sure that our teachers are supported and that their morale is supported as well, because in order to attract, and not just attract, but to retain those teachers, there needs to be support for them. And when we look at, for example, fair wages and taxes, are we paying a decent wage for not just teachers, but the paras, right? I mean, I talked to a woman who works in the school district who is a paraprofessional there, $12 an hour, and that's just not even close. So in addition to the funding piece of it, there's also the support, those additional human supports in the classroom as well.
Thank you. What environmental issues in general need to be addressed to keep Wisconsin as a top recreational tourist destination?
A top recreational tourist destination. Okay. Well, we've got certainly clean water is at the top of the list. I mean, we live in an area that has abundant water, and it is attractive. I just had the opportunity this week to get out and do a little close inspection of Lake Winnebago, and unfortunately been a little busy this summer, so that was only my second time out in the kayak. And our waters are a challenge, and we need to not just look at what we're providing for drinking water, but for the recreational side of that, and some of that comes from upstream. There are policies that, intergovernmental policies to look at different stormwater approaches, and as climate change increases the frequency and the intensity of the storms that we see, oh my gosh, I can't believe, did you see the snow today, for example?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I was like, wait, I wasn't ready for that.
I wasn't ready for snow.
but certainly, how we use our land impacts our waters. And to be hospitable to our tourists and our friends who come in to enjoy that, we certainly have to be very protective of our land, whether or not that's cleaning up pollution or preventing it, having folks pay their fair share, entities pay their fair share when there is pollution, and impervious versus pervious surfaces, our built environment. We have to be very mindful, because it's not just the here and now, but it is that future generation as well. I'd love to think that my grandkids are going to be able to continue to enjoy, kayaking on the pristine Wisconsin waters, 40 years from now. But the truth of the matter is, our built environment contributes to some of that, and so we have to be very thoughtful and mindful.
Thank you. So Oshkosh and Wisconsin as a whole have issues with infrastructure. We have a bridge in its upright position, right? As a member of the Assembly, how do you see yourself helping bridge the infrastructure gap, our bridges, roads, and so forth? Where do you see the state coming in to help us with that?
Well, again, we have to show up and do the work, and sometimes that means, making sure that we have good data. In the case here locally, the parts and the supply chain and labor have been impacting many repairs, and our seasonality is a big piece of it as well. It's interesting. There was a student at UW Oshkosh last night saying how their parents want to know, why is there so much construction? Well, it tends to be concentrated in a very short period of time. And we do have extremes in our climate that we experience, which impacts our roads, our concrete. And we have to maintain them on a continuous basis rather than, pushing those things down the road, no pun intended. They need to be taken care of now. And sometimes, again, we have to think about, how we're doing that. Our roads here in the city of Oshkosh, I think we're doing just under a couple of miles a year in terms of keeping up with that. And yet we're also expanding. So there are perhaps some things that we also need to look at with some of the transportation aids at the state level as well.
Thank you. So we are going to talk about a few bipartisan opportunities that are needed to move the state forward on issues that the majority of the public supports. So can you share with us where you stand on the legalization of marijuana?
Sure, absolutely. Well, we've seen surrounding states go legal in different levels. I think Minnesota is medical. I believe Michigan is medical and recreational. And I'm absolutely 100% in support of the medical use of marijuana and legalizing that. Decriminalizing marijuana use. I am like 95% on the recreational side, but I'm not quite there 100%. It really depended to me on how it's packaged. And there are economic arguments and financial arguments for going full on with that. But we also have to look at, how we would address some of the unintended consequences. And so I believe that it depends on how it's packaged, both literally and figuratively.
Okay. And the other one, of course, is going to be a hot button for those who are in the Assembly this next term, and that would be women's reproductive rights.
Absolutely. Safe, legal, and private. Women do not need me as their representative in their doctor's office telling them what they need to do. We cannot abide an 1849 law that restricts that. Safe, legal, and private is what I believe on that issue. We're not just talking about, birth control and, irresponsibility. We're talking about health. And for a woman or a pregnant person not to have access to safe, legal, and private health care, it's extremely restrictive on the healthcare side. And it limits many other aspects. And for us to go back to 1849, so many women that I talk to about this issue, they can't believe it actually happened. They're like, how did this happen? And so safe, legal, private.
Thank you. So for now, the floor is yours for the last few minutes to share with us what you would like to and what you want to share with the voters out there.
Sure. I mean, we've seen how, over the last 20 years or so, cities have been impacted, municipalities have been impacted on having to come up with additional fees. We've seen the shift of the property tax burden from so many different angles. We absolutely need our legislators down in Madison to catch up the shared revenue. That is, a very high priority. We also, again, we need legislators who will show up and do the work and also listen. The gaveling in and gaveling out, it's just angering to many people. And we also need to be able to have civil conversations when we disagree. There are so many times when the emotion and the hot air fills the room and the substance goes out the door. I myself and other candidates, I consider myself a grandmother with grit, and I'm certainly interested in working on problems for people, again, for the faces of Oshkosh. And if we don't come together and work on those, we're not going to continue forward as Wisconsin is known for.
Well, thank you, Lori. We appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Thank you to Oshkosh Media for hosting us. The interviews with candidates Herman and Palmeri will be viewed on Oshkosh Media at Spectrum Channel 10 or GovTV, as well as on their YouTube channel, which can be found at oshkoshmedia.org. Remember to vote on Tuesday, November 8th. For information on what you will have on your personal ballot, you can visit vote411.org. Thank you, and have a great day.